Well, it's a good example of why we need this podcast, to be honest with you, because exactly that binary is the problem. I believe that Robin Simcox, who's the new government commissioner on counter-terrorism, said as a result of the marches that there are no-go zones for Jews in central London on Saturdays. I'm actually in central London now, and I managed to get here without thinking I have to run away. So that's just an inflammatory thing to say, which does create the binary. However, both things can be true, which is that, yes, the constant focus, of which the marches are a big part, on this conflict, which is 4,000 miles away, can make a lot of Jews feel like I am somehow associated with this, caught in it, I don't feel I can do anything about it, but what should I say about it? And then that can lead to a sort of sense of intimidation, which I'm sure the marches, and most of the marchers, do not intend.
And obviously Robin Simcox is not here to defend himself, but on the politics and separating feelings from facts, we saw that extraordinary speech made by the Prime Minister. A lot of the focus seemed to be about the marches. What did you make of that speech? What do you think he was trying to do there?
I mean, I found that speech unusual. I just couldn't understand why it was done. Friday, late one night, addressing the nation. I couldn't understand what the national crisis was. And the hook, I think, that the Prime Minister used was the fact that George Galloway had been elected in Rochdale. And as, again, we discussed on the podcast, this was the 12th time that George Galloway had stood and the 7th time that he'd been elected to Parliament. So it seemed an odd way to kind of trigger an address to the nation speech. I think we have to go right back to October in this, when the last ex-Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, started to phrase and frame these marches as hate marches with no evidence, with no substance to them, but just because she was politicking to try and be the next leader of the Conservative Party. But in doing so, I think she set off a series of events which has now meant that these conversations have become very binary.
Well, I think it was a statement to make him feel a bit like Winston Churchill or a bit like someone in a moment of emergency. I think the problem with that is that the creation of a moment of emergency for dramatic purposes can just heighten a state of fear. You know, neither Muslims nor Jews are, in fact, a homogeneous bloc, right? We all have different opinions. The whole thing about racism, to some extent, it's about people imagining that X or Y minority all think the same way, all do the same thing, all have the same politics. That is never true, and particularly not true about Jews and Muslims.
How do you get over the fight about the hierarchy of who is suffering more, in terms of, you know, arguments that actually anti-Semitism is much bigger than Islamophobia?
It depends on where you are. That's the thing. So Sayeeda is often talking about the way that she feels the government is trying to shut down Muslim voices, and I'm sure she's right about that. But in a 360-degree way of looking at the world, in the places I come from, which is kind of, I guess, a sort of artistic community and online and all the rest of it, a lot of Jews feel that if they try and say anything at all defensive, or, you know, that they support the right of the State of Israel to exist or whatever, then they are immediately attacked and, you know, their book tours are stopped and whatever. It seems to be like it depends on many different places. Like, some spaces will be looking like they are trying to create one particular type of hierarchy, another will be a different type of hierarchy. When I wrote Jews Don't Count, I used the phrase, I kind of think I invented it, but I might be wrong, hierarchy of racism, right? In which Jews didn't seem to be in the conversation at all, and anti-Semitism didn't seem to be in the conversation at all about racism and discrimination and inclusion and representation, all the conversations that progressives were having at the present moment.
Baroness Warsi, can I just ask you, I mean, obviously, you know, you're looking at the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, as he heads into an election, you know, the government as it heads into an election. How does all of this, how should all of this impact policy making and impact the campaigning we're going to see over the next few months?
I will not let them weaponise Jewish communities and weaponise Muslim communities. I will not let them weaponise anti-Semitism and weaponise Islamophobia. And I will not let them make either British Jewish communities or British Muslim communities electoral fodder at the next general election. And I hope that this podcast will play some part in pushing back against that kind of populist rhetoric.
And presumably you do agree with that?
I agree with that, yes.
I agree.
But there are bits in the podcast where we don't agree and it gets a bit feisty.
David Baddiel.
Who wants to listen to just agreement?
David Baddiel, Sayeeda Warsi, thank you both for